This is Dr. Karen, and you are listening to the Facto Leaders podcast on the B Podcast Network, where I share up-to-date, evidence-based practices, my own experiences, and guest interviews designed to help pediatric therapists, educators, and aspiring school leaders design services that support social, emotional, and academic growth and set kids up for success in adulthood. Whether you want to learn effective strategies for your therapy session or classroom, be an influential leader on your team, or find creative ways to use your skills to advance in your career, I've got you covered. Hey everybody, it's Dr. Karen, and welcome to episode 188 of the De Facto Leaders podcast on the B Podcast Network. Syntactic use is considered an academic skill that's useful for reading comprehension and writing, but the impact of sentence comprehension goes way beyond school. Our ability to comprehend messages at the word and sentence level in oral and written language has a huge impact on our ability to function. So when clinicians ask me, should I focus on syntax or should I focus on life skills, my response is that syntax is a life skill. The same is true about semantic knowledge because of the significant impact background knowledge has on our ability to navigate functional situations. Yet scaffolding for students who are not yet able to read and write can be challenging, which is why I wanted to share 2 questions on this topic from my Language Therapy Advanced Foundations members group, which is what I share in this Q&A session that I took from the members' Facebook community. In this session, I share examples of complex syntax that may occur during functional tasks, like signing up for medical appointments, applying for a job, or grocery shopping. Why effective vocabulary instruction in content areas such as science and social studies is essential for positive life outcomes. Scaffolding syntactic study for non-readers or emergent readers, and does it make sense to do semantic feature analysis with a student who has an intellectual disability? And then I also talk about following directions, topic maintenance, and self-advocacy, and what language skills do we need to meet goals in these areas. And should we even be writing IEP goals for these skills? Be sure to check the show notes because I mention some previous episodes where I give some additional information about the impact of language on life outcomes and self-advocacy, as well as whether or not we can make progress with those students who are non-readers or emergent readers, even at ages where we would typically expect kids to be reading. So definitely check out the show notes. And also, this session is taken from the Language Therapy Advanced Foundations members community. I do these regular Q&A sessions with members of the Language Therapy Advanced Foundations course, and really they are sessions to help troubleshoot specific cases that people come up with as they are implementing the framework that I teach in the program. Language Therapy Advanced Foundations is my course that helps SLPs and other professionals working on language to create a system for language therapy. Some of the common things I hear from SLPs are that they're not really sure where to start with language, especially with school-age kids, just because it is so broad. There's so many different things we can be focusing on. And when a lot of people come to me in the program, they are focusing on things like WH questions and topic maintenance and stating the main idea and general comprehension goals, and they're not seeing the progress that they know that their students are capable of, and they need a better system. A lot of times people kind of toggle back and forth between trying to be super functional, which actually makes things very challenging for kids because there's not enough scaffolding in place. We've kind of jumped to a situation that is too unstructured, or maybe they're in therapy and they're doing things that seem kind of rote, drill and kill, and there's really no connection between those two things. So I help you build the bridge from structured to functional in Language Therapy Advanced Foundations with strategies that you can implement even if you only have 30 minutes a week to do language therapy with your students. To learn more about Language Therapy Advanced Foundations, you can go to drkarenspeech.com/language therapy. Now, please enjoy this session from the Language Therapy Advanced Foundations members group about scaffolding, semantic, and syntactic instruction, as well as some functional situations where we'd have to apply complex vocabulary and syntax. So there's a couple questions that I wanted to address this week about, well, how do we support non-readers in some of the strategies that we're working on in this program where they do seem more academic on the surface. So I wanted to clarify some confusion about that. And then I also wanted to talk about how we're going to support students who are diagnosed with intellectual disabilities. And we have this question about, do we do things that are functional, and I'm using that term in big air quotes, or do we focus on things that are academic? So that's what I'm going to get into tonight. Before I started, I wanted to just remind everyone that in the month of September, I am doing a special series on the De Facto Leaders podcast for National Literacy Month. It is a special effort that we're doing on the B Podcast Network in partnership with Reading is Fundamental, which is a nonprofit that focuses on connecting schools and families with resources. They do a lot with book distribution and promoting the science of reading. So definitely check them out. They have some great resources for getting books into the hands of families and schools. And also they've got some great resources just as far as reading instruction. So I have some great episodes coming out starting September 4th, which are going to be available on De Facto Leaders. I've got some extra episodes this month that you'll definitely want to check out. I start off with an episode with Dr. Jan Wazowitz from Spell Links talking about the language of reading, writing, and spelling. So not just about reading, but about spelling and writing as well under that broader umbrella of literacy. Then talking about reading myths with Anna Geiger from The Measured Mom, who is a former balanced literacy teacher who realized that a lot of what she was doing wasn't evidence-based and has started teaching about structured literacy. Then I have an episode with Tom Pardon where we talk about dyslexia mandates, as well as supporting struggling readers in secondary school. He's a semi-retired SLP who has done a lot of great work with literacy at the secondary level, as well as figuring out what language and literacy skills students need in order to appropriately, or more accurately, successfully use assistive technology that they have available to them for literacy. Then I have an interview with Susan Brady, who does a lot of wonderful work with book distribution. She is a reading specialist and she does a lot of book clubs in her community to really engage families. Then I have an episode with Dr. Shamika Stewart on the school to confinement pipeline, as well as what is really going on when students are presenting with avoidance and other behavior problems, and when is it really a language issue that has not been diagnosed or a literacy issue. Then I have an interview with Dr. Carla McGregor where we talk about developmental language disorder, including some of the legal guidelines, as well as the significant impact that language disorders can have on your life. So thinking about language as a life skill, not just thinking about it as an academic skill that we need in order to comprehend things that we read in school. And then finally, I wrap up with a conversation with Dr. Molly Ness, where we talk about policy briefs and getting started with advocacy work, as well as the power of read alouds and think alouds to build vocabulary skills. So check it out. It is on De Facto Leaders this month. Go to defactoleaders.com or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. It's on Apple, Spotify, and a lot of the other networks. So let's get into the questions for today. So there is a question about, well, let me just start off by saying just generally how we want to think about language and academics and functional versus academic goals. So when people ask things like, should I be focusing on things like semantic feature analysis or syntax, when students aren't really going to have academic goals. This seems kind of academic. Shouldn't I be focusing on life skills and functional skills? Or maybe they're getting pressure from their administration to focus on life skills. So my short answer to that question is that language skills are life skills. A lot of times when we shift towards those life skills curriculums, we make things or we significantly underestimate the linguistic demands of things that kids will eventually have to do when they're adults in their day-to-day life. Even if they are not going to go to college after high school or continue their schooling, even if they're going directly into the workforce, and even if they're going to have support, the linguistic demands of a lot of things that we have to do are significant. And a lot of times we underestimate the amount of language that you need for basic day-to-day things, like reading street signs, filling out job applications, looking through a website to find information about maybe something that you want to order online, or learning about how you might sign up for a medical appointment. So it's how we do things today. And this is, obviously a lot of things are online now, but even before things were online, we still had to fill out paperwork and forms, and all of those things are going to be really important. So what I wanted to do today, before I get into the specifics of the two questions that I had for today, I wanted to just go through a couple websites that I would recommend that you check out. And this is something that you can think about in therapy. So a lot of times people ask me, how do you figure out what vocabulary words we should be doing in therapy? So content is very important. In order to be able to problem solve, we have to have adequate background knowledge, and we have to have that context of what we're talking about in order to be able to get the gist or the main idea. If you don't have those adequate vocabulary skills, it's going to be difficult for you to create that mental image when you're thinking about something that you're reading. And we create that mental imagery when we're reading, but also when we're just going through our day-to-day lives. So something that you can do, in addition to just looking at the curriculum, is that you can also look at some different reading materials that could be useful for students in their day-to-day life. Or think about, okay, if you've got a student in elementary school and you're not really sure what's going to happen, like, are they going to be going to college? Are they going to be going right into the workforce? All right, think about, all right, they're in elementary school now, but where do I eventually want them to be when they're in high school, when they're applying for a job, or when they're in college and they're applying for a job, or when they're graduating from high school and they're going into the workforce? So look at some of the tools and forms and content that they might have to be consuming in order to do those activities. And you can use that as your quote curriculum, or where you get your vocabulary. So you can do a mix of that and pulling from their actual academic curriculum. Now, people a lot of times kind of give schools a hard time for not being functional, but a lot of times the vocabulary in reading curriculums and science curriculums and social studies curriculums is actually pretty functional when you line it up with some of the things that we have outside just day to day. So I'm going to give you two places to go as kind of an assignment for just looking at syntax and vocabulary during a functional activity. So I am going to look at the Kroger website, and I'm going to look at the Chick-fil-A website. I'm going to start with Chick-fil-A. So I'm starting with Chick-fil-A because Chick-fil-A is known for having a very good learning and development program, which means their employee training is really good. So it's actually a great opportunity for young people to get their first job, because since they have good employee training programs, there's good onboarding. So that means that people who work for Chick-fil-A are going to have access to good training that is going to teach them to be a good employee, and they can move up in that organization, or they can just have a good experience at their first job. So what would one want to do if they were going to get hired at Chick-fil-A? So I am on the careers section of the Chick-fil-A website, just scrolling through. And what I would recommend you do is just look at some of the language on here and look at some of the vocabulary and types of words that are on here. So
here's a complex sentence right under the restaurant career section. From the kitchen team to restaurant leadership, each person who joins has the opportunity to thrive personally and professionally. So we've got some, let's see, adverbs there. We have some complex syntax. We have, let's see, in this section, there's multiple clauses. We've got some complex vocabulary. Do they know what an opportunity is? There's some things that are very abstract. Let me see what else we have here. With many opportunities to grow, entry-level team member roles can be a great place to start at a Chick-fil-A restaurant. Again, so we're already starting with complex syntax there. So what you can do is use the syntax templates that are in this program as a starting point so that you understand. Again, I give you examples of different sentence types, starting with simple sentences and joining parts of simple sentences all the way through sentences with relative clauses. So that's generally the order and the progression that you're going to want to go when you're thinking about scaffolding, only you don't have to be too rigid with it. You can challenge students before they've officially mastered a lower level. It's okay to do that, but that scaffolding is there for you to understand how to support students in the moment. But what you can also do is use what I've given you to get yourself very comfortable with doing things like sentence combining and deconstruction and expanding with your students and get a really solid understanding of what a complex sentence looks like. And then come over to an activity like this, like a website or something they're reading in class, and then take what you've learned over there from me and pull it over to another activity that is more functional for students. And again, it's not that the first activity that I'm giving you isn't functional. It's the step that you need to take to get over here. A lot of times, if you don't do that work initially, it's hard to come over to a more challenging task. So that's one way you can do it. You can pull vocabulary. You can even teach students to, just go find information on the website as well. So let me, before I move on, look at the Kroger website. So thinking about what would someone have to do regardless of, whether or not this is at their job. So I am on the Kroger website in the pharmacy and health tab under where you can sign up for vaccines under health services. So again, a lot of complex vocabulary in here, a lot of different punctuation, a lot of figurative language, very abstract use of vocabulary like care is convenience that works for everyone. So again, there's some figurative language in that sentence where we've got a metaphor there. So even as I'm just looking through how to fill out this form, we have biometric screenings. So that's a difficult word that could potentially maybe pop up in science, but also in life. And then there's a whole list of, we offer the following vaccinations and a whole list of medical conditions. So again, something that could come up in science vocabulary. Then there's all kinds of different forms that you could click on. A lot of tier 2 vocabulary here. Manage, as in manage my prescriptions. Yeah, lots of stuff here. So again, just use things like this. But the point being is that a lot of times we think, oh, well, if it's, complex vocabulary, if it's complex syntax, it's academic. And then when we go to life skills, we make it's not challenging enough and it doesn't move up that, that hierarchy to the extent where students would need in order to be prepared for life. And we've really got to think about building those skills. So that's why I think when people say something like semantic feature analysis or a sentence combining, those are strategies that are going to help you get to the point that you might be able to move over to an activity like reading a website or reading something in class, reading an article online. So we've got to build that foundation before we move over to the other thing. Yes, we want to eventually move over to the other thing and pull this structured activity, pull what we've done when we are working on content and sentence structure. We pull that over to the less structured activity, but we've got to build that foundation first. So one of the first questions that I had from that I wanted to address today is, how would we address something like a syntax level work for a non-reader? And my question, or my response to that, is that you could really do a lot of the things that I walk through, like sentence combining, sentence deconstruction, expanding sentences. You can just do that orally without requiring students read the print. Now, you could still provide the print there and give them some exposure, but you can actually do this activity without the print. Now, it is going to require some additional scaffolding, like repeating the sentence. You might want to use some visuals that represent different parts of the sentence, because if you've got students with working memory issues, they might not remember the whole sentence. So you might have to do more repeating and practicing, but you can certainly do these activities orally as well. You can also, if you have students who are, maybe they're struggling readers, they're not necessarily reading where a lot of the other kids are at their age, then what you can do is maybe you are writing part of the sentence for the student and they're just filling in one word, or they're filling in part of the sentence. So that's another way you can do it. And I would encourage you to try to get students to interact with the print as much as you possibly can, but you can also do these activities orally as well. Something else, as I was saying before, how I encourage you to take what I've given you and iterate on it. This is really just what I've given you in the Ultimate Guides to Sentence Structure are really just a mechanism for me to deliver examples to you. It's not meant to be a structured, it's not meant to be a rigid curriculum. It is meant to be structured. It's not meant to be rigid. So what you want to do is use that knowledge to maybe you have some pictures or a scene that you're looking at, or something that you're talking about where they have something else to look at, and maybe you're combining different sentences about that scene or those pictures, and so that's giving you a little bit of a memory cue as well. The other thing is that you can also do deconstruction, where you're presenting the information, you're presenting the sentences to students, and they're pulling out the key pieces of the sentence. So maybe there's two clauses and you want them to tell you the two messages in that sentence. So that's something you can do orally as well. Another thing you can do is just gradually fade the amount that you give students. So if you are having them do things like sentence repetition or sentence generation, you might give them part of the sentence and they fill in the blank, and you can gradually fade the amount that you're giving them even within that one sentence. So you want to do a blend of those really structured activities and the less structured activities within your session and kind of work up. But the main thing is that there's a lot of ways that you can customize this for non-readers. But I would encourage you to find opportunities to get them to interact with print when at all possible. All right, so the next question that I had was about a student who, I'm going to pull it up on my other screen over here. So this is a question that I actually thought, I looked at it and I thought that I missed it, but it actually was from about a year ago. So, and I just saw it the other day. So like I said, everybody, if I don't respond to you within like 48 hours of your comment in this group, feel free to tag me, because it means that it got bumped down in my news feed. So, okay, so here's the scenario. So I have a new student with a qualification, or they have an intellectual disability, shy, very rarely speaks, but is starting to make comments and open up a little bit. I want to start teaching semantic feature analysis, but is this too much for him? Would it be better to focus on something functional, like maintaining a topic of conversation or asking for help? Should I be focusing on pragmatic concerns, or should I be focusing on syntax and vocabulary? The previous SLP was focused on pronouns, present tense verbs, and following directions correctly. So I wanted to comment on the previous goals from the other SLP. So first of all, I just want to say that, of course, language is difficult. There's a lot of things that we could be focusing on. So this is confusing and it's really difficult to know where to focus. And then also I wrote goals for all of these things at one point in time. But that being said, I don't think that those things are the most productive place that you can focus your time and energy. And then I wanted to comment on the question about pragmatic language. So remembering that when we're talking about pragmatic language, we're really talking about executive functioning. So the ability of someone to read the situation and pay attention to some of those, nonverbal cues as well, and be able to process them and understand them and be aware of them in the moment. So again, just being able to read the room. And so here's the thing, and I don't know exactly what all is going on with the student socially, but I will say that if you have a student who, if they are not able to process what's going on in the conversation because they are having issues with syntax and vocabulary, it could be difficult for them to make comments that are relevant to what's going on in the conversation because they might be having a difficult time following it. And then it could also be difficult for him to formulate his sentences in a timely fashion to be able to make that comment or follow along or participate in the conversation in a way that's easy for him. So that could be impacting his ability to again maintain a topic. So it might be more useful to focus on some of those language skills like syntax and vocabulary, because that could actually improve the student's ability to pay attention and participate in a conversation. And then I would say the same thing about goals for asking for help. So I do think that a self-advocacy goal could potentially be useful. But in order to be able to self-advocate, you have to be able to read a situation to know when you need to ask for help. And then you need to have the language skills to be able to ask for help and go back and forth in that conversation. So again, the student's language skills could be impacting his ability to meet that asking for help goal. So you could write the goal for self-advocacy. You might be able to write some goals for pragmatic language, but you also want to make sure that you are building the language skills that are going to support those goals. So thinking about how would we support a student for, that has this profile. So again, I wanted to just point out again that students who have intellectual disabilities, and this is true for language, it's also true for things like reading, they can make progress. It's just not going to be at the same rate as their peers who don't have intellectual disabilities. So I think that we do students a disservice if we don't try to work on these skills with them. And again, as I said before, language skills are life skills. So yes, something like semantic feature analysis could be very academic in nature in the way that we address it. Same could be working on syntax, because that's going to really impact your ability to do academic papers and take tests and things like that. But it's also going to impact your ability to do a lot of other things that you're just going to have to do in your day-to-day life, like I was describing earlier when I was looking at the websites. So all that being said, I do think it would be useful to focus on semantic feature analysis. You definitely want to make sure that you're providing appropriate scaffolding. And I have a lot of other videos in this group that you can search or look in your members area to learn about how to scaffold for semantic feature analysis. But really what we're doing when we're working on semantic feature analysis is we are partially teaching content, so we can use it to teach specific vocabulary words. We can also use semantic feature analysis to build self-questioning. So our ability to ask ourselves questions and retrieve information. So that's going to both build vocabulary of the word that you're currently studying, but also teach students a strategy for retrieving information that could serve as a word learning strategy. And then we also have an opportunity to teach some of those perspective taking skills. So if you're working with students in a group, we can talk about, all right, what would the other people need to know as you're describing this word, to know what you're talking about here. So teaching students how to be specific and complete in their descriptions of words also gives us that opportunity to help them to think about the perspectives of others. So there's an opportunity there as well. So again, we just have to move at a different pace. We might have to scaffold more. You might not be able to get to all of the semantic features, or the student might not be able to give you as much. But when we're thinking about students, again, that are moving at a different pace, we want to measure progress against themselves, not necessarily progress measured up according to their peers. And this is not to say that it's never appropriate to consider what's age appropriate in your whole problem solving process. It's just not the only thing that you're thinking about. Yes, when we think about what does this student need to do in order to be successful, considering environmental expectations is one of those things that might help you to determine what the student needs to do in order to be successful, but it's not the only thing, and we want to be flexible about it, because there might be certain things that we expect or that might be typical in that environment, and maybe we might think about that student's individual goals and think, well, maybe some of these things that are expected or make sense for the student to have as goals, but maybe some of them don't. And, there are other places where, some of the standards aren't necessarily as much of a priority. So that's how I would think about it. Again, I would just remember that when we have goals for things like following directions, or even verb tenses and pronouns, some of those can be embedded into other goals. And what we really want to be careful about when we're thinking about following directions is that it's not about compliance. It's about giving them the language skills that they need in order to understand the directions, so that they have the ability to understand what's going on and choose their actions accordingly. That's really what we're doing when we're following directions. So following directions goals should be about building vocabulary and syntax and other language skills that are going to support comprehension, because that's really why, that those are the underlying skills that we need in order to follow directions. They shouldn't be compliance based. So again, it's easy to kind of get lost in that, but that's something that I would encourage when we're thinking about those kinds of goals, because again, there might be times when you could write a goal for following directions. You just got to be very careful about how you implement it and word it, and really think about if that makes sense for the student, or if it might make sense to have another goal about building vocabulary or working specifically on syntax. So that's going to wrap up our Q&A for today. A couple things. I think it would be really helpful in the conversation about how important language skills are on life. Definitely take a listen to some of the episodes that I've got coming up on De Facto Leaders, especially my episode with Dr. Carla McGregor and my episode with Dr. Shamika Stewart, where we really talk about the impact that language can have on things like behavior and some of the expectations that we have for students when they get into job situations, or even just some of those other interactions that they might have day to day, even when they're at school. Being able to understand the disciplinary standards, being able to understand their rights. So that's one thing that came up in my conversation with Dr. McGregor. So some great information shared. So check them out, defactoleaders.com, or Apple, Spotify, any of your podcast directories. And all of these are going to be published in the month of September. And they'll be available after that as well. Thanks, everybody, and I will see you next time.
Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to check the show notes for all of the links where you can go to learn about all of the great resources that we mentioned in this episode, as well as where you can go to learn more about Language Therapy Advanced Foundations, my program that helps SLPs and other professionals working on language to create a system for language therapy. You can learn more about the program at drkarenspeech.com/language therapy. As always, thank you so much for listening. It helps me so much if you leave me a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you found this useful, please feel free to share it with your friends or colleagues. If you are interested in being a guest, if you would like to invite me to be a guest on your show, or if you have a suggestion for a guest, please send me an email at talktome@drkarenspeech.com. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.